I would love to have an art project where I just spend an entire day following my son and just like trying to like capture him, but it's constantly disappearing because he's constantly evolving and he's constantly a new person. That moment is gone, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just like parenting. It's just like you're trying to like capture something and it's disappearing before they're already another version of themselves.
I'm Nikko Snyder, and this is Parenting Creative, a podcast that explores the places where creative life and parenting collide and all the magic and mess that ensues. In our inaugural season, we're delving into the creative lives of parents making art that ranges from theater and music to craft, journalism, and poetry. Our goal is to build community and connection for those living deep in the struggles of caring for others, while at the same time prioritizing their own creative lives. If you'd like to hear more conversations about making art while parenting, please help grow our community by following Parenting Creative wherever you get your podcasts, leaving us a 5-star review with a few kind words, and visiting parentingcreative.com to sign up for our email newsletter. On today's episode, I'm talking to journalist, dancer, photographer, and parent of 4, Nichole Huck. Nichole lives on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan. As a journalist, she's passionate about public broadcasting, and currently she produces a daily current events show on CBC Radio in Saskatchewan. Nichole and I go back a long way, almost 20 years, and when I started to develop the concept for this podcast, I thought of her right away. But when I first reached out to Nichole, she asked me why I'd thought of her and told me she didn't really think of herself as a creative. Her question gave me a good excuse to reflect on how I define creativity and get clearer about what the point of this podcast actually is. Here's what I wrote to Nichole in response to her question. It's funny, I hadn't necessarily thought through exactly why I want you on the podcast. I think it's mostly because you have this innate curiosity about people and the world around you that I admire and find extremely magical, and that also seems to be linked to how inclusive and open-minded and hearted you are. And I think curiosity is a fundamental ingredient of creativity and of a creative life. Your curiosity translates into a genuine appreciation of difference and diversity that really fosters inclusion and belonging and community. And I love that about you. What quality could possibly be better for a journalist, especially in our current society? And what quality could be better for a parent to model to their children? So while you may not consider yourself a quote-unquote creative, I think this project would really be missing out and falling short if its conception of creative life was too narrow to encompass your beautiful spirit. In our conversation, Nichole and I talk about parenting and community, creating meaning by sharing each other's stories, the power of everyday micro-connections, jazz as a metaphor for parenting, listening to people even when you disagree with them, giving ourselves permission to enjoy the different seasons of life, raising boys in the age of impossible masculinity, high-fiving strangers, and the curative properties of Bison hearts. I do want to mention that near the end of the interview, Nichole mentions a friend who died by suicide, so I also want to offer a trigger warning about that. Here's my conversation with journalist, dancer, photographer, parent, and an introverted Uber driver's worst nightmare, Nichole Huck. Nichole Huck, welcome to Parenting Creative. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very honored to be among the people that you've selected, and I'm excited to hear all of the other interviews.
Really, really pleased that you are among the first people that I get to talk to. We've known each other for a long time, way before kids, different time of life. So yeah, really excited to see how your life has evolved over the years and really looking forward to talking about your life and where things are at for you.
I love aging because you get to know people for longer periods of time. And I feel like often in creative circumstances, like if I see my friends who play in a band playing and I'm like, I've watched you performing since you were 15 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And I love seeing that evolution and just getting to like look at a person and also see all the iterations of them at the same time. I don't know. I think that getting older is such a gift. I don't take that for granted. Yeah. So I'm happy to have known so many different iterations of you, Nikko.
Thanks. Okay, so I would love it to get started, if you would be able to introduce yourself and where you are in the world and your your life and worldview, and then maybe introduce something about your the work that you do, the creative work that you do.
Sure. So my name is Nichole Huck, and I live in Regina, Saskatchewan. I am a mother of 4 between the ages of 3 and 13, 2 boys and 2 girls. I am a journalist, so I've worked for the CBC for 15 years, at least 15 years. And over that time, I've mostly worked in radio as a reporter. And then for the big chunk of the last kind of decade, I've been a radio producer. So that means you're kind of in charge of the current affairs shows. And I do love current affairs so much, especially the show I'm on right now. It's an hour-long conversation every day. And I love that you can really dig into topics a little bit more, that you can bring together people who wouldn't necessarily get a chance to talk with each other. And that's kind of the magic for me of like public broadcasting or having a provincial conversation around something.
Quick note, throughout the interview, Nichole gives lots of different examples of episodes that she's produced for her show over the past year. So we're going to make sure to link those out in the show notes.
And then I also dance. I have been in this adult beginner group for like about 15 years as well. And I refuse to change groups because I just love the people in the group so much. And I love that my teacher, she's a couple years older than me, and I will continue being in her class until we can no longer dance, you know? And then I'm sure that we'll find another way. I like the community that comes with it because she's my neighbor also. People who run the dance school live in my neighborhood. And it feels like over this decade plus, you know, I've seen the dancers grow up. Like I dance with their parents. And then we've just created this beautiful community around it. So I just feel grateful to be part of that. And I really like taking pictures. But I actually, at this point in my life, don't love getting paid for taking photos. I love taking photos for people, but I like it to be a gift that I can give someone. I take a lot of photos, and there's a lot of reasons why I do that. I think probably my children are my biggest muse. I just see beauty around me and I want to capture it. And for other people, sometimes I see like an interaction between like a parent and their kid, and I just want them to like have that moment. So a lot of the times when I'm taking pictures for other people, or like I feel like that's my contribution to like a group thing. Maybe someone else is very good at like making the fire, you know, something. And my contribution is that I'm like documenting these special moments that are happening so that they can like look back at that and like be transported to that moment.
You do have a real gift with the camera. I feel like you capture beauty in an amazing way. We live far away from each other, but I benefit all the time from your beautiful, prolific photography. So yeah.
You know, like people that have the practice of gratitude, like their gratitude journal. And I feel like it's like my gratitude journal. It's just a different medium. I'm very conscious of my walk to and from work. It's not that long of a walk. It's only about a 10-minute walk. So it's like 40 minutes of my time by myself in a day where I'm walking back and forth and I'm listening. I'm like open to be able to like listen to birds. I can see rabbits. I can watch how like the light is reflecting off of the construction site. And so I'll often stop on my walk to work to take photos, and I feel like it's just part of like being conscious of the beauty that's around you, or like the light is really beautiful right now. The hoarfrost is, I mean, everybody thinks hoarfrost is gorgeous, and of course it is, but I think it's just like being mindful of being conscious of like seeing those little moments of beauty, and then the act of like taking the photo, the same as if you were journaling. And writing that down. It's just like internalizing it and giving a space for that gratitude.
You mentioned current events. That's your day job. That's your world, is kind of being deep into current events daily, engaging with those. And I'd love to I'd love to hear a bit about that, just how that is for you, and also your family, I guess, because you mentioned when we've talked before that, you know, the radio is always on in your house, and that, you know, your kids are also really aware of what's going on in the world. Kind of, yeah, I'm curious to know a bit about that, how you manage that for yourself, because I just personally, I find it can be hard to stay engaged, to be engaged in a positive way with current events constantly. And then also for your kids, another thing that you've mentioned to me, I think your oldest child, you mentioned they're thoughtful and, you know, engaged in like kind of social issues and that kind of thing. And also that you've engaged them in some of your, like, I think even interviewing them and doing things. So curious, yeah, just if you could talk about that a bit.
I mean, radio, and in particular CBC radio, has just been like the soundscape of our lives. Like, I look back at videos of the kids, you know, maybe like crawling for the first time or whatever, but you always hear CBC in the background. So they've grown up with that. And it's good, and it has its challenges, because not everything in the news is pleasant, right? There's a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of things that are really inexplicable. You can't justify why some things are happening, and there's no like magic bullet solution for these things either. I think about war, or I think about when something bad happens to a child, or things like that, where the kids are hearing that on the news as well. But I think more often than not, they're hearing about what's going on. Like, they're very plugged into politics, and they know the parties and who is running. And they, unfortunately, like most Canadians, know way too much about what's going on with the American elections and politics in the States as well. And it's funny how much kids actually have opinions about these things too. You'd be surprised how often kids on playgrounds have conversations about Donald Trump. I think a lot more common than you might realize. But it also means that they're constantly surrounded by thoughtful conversation. Like, there's a difference between news and current affairs to me. Like, the news is important because you need to get that snapshot of what's happening. And then the current affairs helps provide context to something and helps like a deeper understanding. And so we're mostly listening to current affairs. I mean, the news happens, but the current affairs is so that news isn't happening in isolation. It's helping understand and deepening our understanding of some of these things. And my show, it's not just whatever's happening in the news. Like, sometimes it is like, those are the things that are happening, like, obviously, during the political cycle or like an election cycle, you're going to have a lot more politics on your show and these types of things. But it's also the things of life, too. For instance, we had a show with an author, a woman who'd written a book about raising boys in the age of impossible masculinity, what she called impossible masculinity. And she was talking about, like having a baby at the time of the Me Too movement. And she's like, I'm a feminist, and this is great to see all this happening, see women being believed. But then there's becomes a little bit of a us versus them type of thing. Mm-hmm. And she's like, and I have these boys who are growing up in this world, and I don't want it to be like us versus them. And she can say things, and I think she's right, that a man maybe can't say, that she can say it's a very tough time to be a man, a young man trying to seek out your identity right now, because everybody's telling you to be quiet, listen, it's not your turn anymore. But also, what does that do to you when people are always telling you to shut up, it's not your turn? And then it just leads to why some young men feel like they need to find a place where they belong, and they find a place where they belong in some of these weird corners of the internet where people are seeing them, Yeah.
So the author Nicole's referring to is named Ruth Whitman. And if you want to check out her book, it's called Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. We'll share that out in the show notes. And we'll also link out to Nicole's show on masculinity.
So when we were doing that show about masculinity and impossible masculinity, I interviewed my 13-year-old on our show. And not that he thinks that he knows everything at 13, but I just feel like it is interesting to have a snapshot of what a 13-year-old is thinking about or not thinking about. And went back to a conversation we had a few years ago where when we talked about masculinity, he was like, you mean toxic masculinity? I'm like, no, not toxic masculinity. Masculinity is not inherently toxic. But so many young boys only hear the word masculinity associated with toxic. And so I had to like be mindful of pointing out, like, look at these men in your life who are great dads and great community people, and they dress up and they're not afraid to, wear makeup to go with their daughters to the Taylor Swift movie, who are patient and kind scout leaders. Like, look around you, and like those are all examples of masculinity that's not toxic masculinity. And I think that sometimes we just have to be like a little bit mindful. And I just thought he was very thoughtful, and it was interesting to know what the qualities are that he sees as being admirable for a man. Like there's just qualities that are admirable for people, but like if you're specifically trying to think of like what do you want to be specific to masculinity, what does that look like for you?
What does it look like for him?
For him, it was not getting angry, not reacting with anger. Like being able to approach a situation, even if it's stressful, calmly was for him what he saw. And maybe that'll change. But for him, being able to like stay cool, even when tensions are high, was like his ideal. And you can unpack that, and it's like anger has a purpose and everything too. But as a 13-year-old boy right now, that's just like what he aspires to, I guess.
Yeah.
Also asked him just what if he thinks it's a harder time to be a boy right now. And I think his answer was also quite thoughtful in that he's like, depends on who you are. Like if you're a queer boy, it's like probably a lot better time for you than in other times. Or if you're someone who just like doesn't fit into like the box of whatever, it's like probably like a better time.
Yeah, I love that. Of course, children are, first of all, they're sponges. They're soaking up everything around them all the time, trying to process it. If we're lucky, we get to talk to them and we get to engage with them.
And now I'm trying to be more intentional about, like, because it's not easy for a 13-year-old to come and talk to his mom necessarily, especially because when I were home, I feel like I'm often like telling him to do things, go clean this, or can you take out the garbage, or can you, help with your sibling so we can get out the door and go do something physical activity outside so I can feel like a good mom. So I've started trying to like go to a movie with him. And then we have like that time after the movie or whatever to like talk about the movie or talk about whatever. But I would love to have an art project where I just spend an entire day following my son and just like trying to like capture him, but it's constantly disappearing because he's constantly evolving and he's constantly a new person, and that moment is gone,
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just like parenting. It's just like you're trying to like capture something and it's disappearing before they're already another version of themselves.
Yeah.
I just want to take a quick sec to thank you for tuning in. Parenting Curative is an independent Canadian podcast. If you like what you hear, please help us grow by taking a few moments to sign up for our email newsletter at parentingcreative.com and by following us on social media. We're at Parenting Creative on Instagram and Blue Sky.
Yeah, shifting back to you, and like your job is to be bringing people together in conversation, generating ideas about what topics to cover, how to approach them, all of this stuff. Like, how do you generate these ideas constantly? And also, like, how do you approach tackling current affairs in a, generative, positive way? I mean, there's so many issues that are hard, right? Like it is a hard time.
Yeah. I mean, having 5 shows a week, there's not necessarily a formula. Like it changes all the time. And then also if I ever get a chance to do my own storytelling, it's different too. I had a whole, like this series called Beautiful Mess, which was inspired by like me wanting to just get wisdom from the people that I saw around me who were parents, like in kind of like hard-earned wisdom too. I mean, I feel like that's what wisdom is. Lessons that you learned through difficult things often. And it started with like somebody who cuts my hair, and her son had gone through testicular cancer, and she was just so wise in talking about how she talked to him about it, you know? And I was like, this wisdom would benefit so many people.
The project that Nichole is referring to, Beautiful Mess, is a wonderful and poignant series about parenting that Nichole created back in 2018 and 2019. But the stories are really no less relevant today, so we're going to share those out in our show notes as well.
But more than that, it's like people having their story recorded and reflected back at them gives it meaning. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something valuable to contribute, but not everybody has that platform. And so to me, like a big part has been being able to like help provide that platform and help someone maybe like discern the wisdom that they have gained. There's like some people just like living their life and not thinking about why they're doing the things that they're doing, or like that extra meaning around it. And I think that sometimes journalists, storytellers, podcasters, can help people pull out some of the wisdom that they have gained, but didn't really see it as wisdom. And having someone trust you to tell their story is like a very special thing. You don't want to mess it up. But that gift of being able to like give someone a snapshot of their life and the sounds of the people in their life, I think is like a really beautiful thing that you can do for someone. And so I appreciate people like you who are giving people a platform to be able to like see some of the wisdom in their own life that they've gained without necessarily, like we're not all artists. Like I'm just so grateful for artists for doing the work that I don't have time or make time to do, which is process the craziness that's happening around us and then reflect it back in a way that people see their stories. Like I think about that with songwriters all the time. Like an artist takes the things around them and then they are able to like reflect it back or process it and reflect it in a way so that other people see those little moments of their own life. I just wish that we had more artists who are paid to just do the work that the rest of us don't make time for, which is processing the big feelings and the big emotions and the big things that are happening in the world and helping us be able to make sense of things.
So interesting to me that you're saying that, and I could not agree more. And at the same time, I see that in the work that you do. And when I was inviting you to be on this podcast, one of your questions to me was why me? And, I don't really see myself as a creative and that was, it was interesting to me because I do see journalism as part of that work of, taking these stories, the big, huge stories of the world, people's individual stories and telling them, finding meaning, creating meaning. So it's I see that in you. And I'm curious, there's a difference between journalism and songwriting or visual art, perhaps. But what is the disconnect between your perception of yourself as a creative person or not? Like what?
I mean, obviously creativity needs to be part of my job in like taking information and trying to deliver it in a way that is accessible and engaging and maybe gets people to think about something in a way that they hadn't thought about before. It's thinking about what voices are not included in the conversation and then actively like seeking them out and making space for it. It's a tricky thing because ours is a phone-in show as well. Mm-hmm. And at the best of times, you just don't even know. You never know who's listening. We did a show like a week ago about bison because it had been 10 years since Papicasis had their bison herd come and live on Papicasis, and 10 years since this bison treaty that's signed by a bunch of signatories across Turtle Island. So the show is about bison and a guy calls in from Okanese First Nation and he's like, well, Okanese has had bison since whatever time. And then he tells this story of like having been in the hospital with diabetes and was going to get his foot amputated, but his brother like showed up with 4 bison hearts and he only ate bison heart. for like that week and he didn't have to get his foot amputated. But it was just like this like interesting, I didn't know at the start of that show what voices, like there's magic in not knowing who's listening and people just bringing something different to a conversation.
Quick aside, I'll admit that I had never heard of this very cool Buffalo Treaty, which was first signed in 2014 and has since been signed by over 70 First Nations in Canada and the US. The goal of the treaty is to return buffalo to the land and promote the buffalo's role in culture, health, education, and the environment. I'll share a link to more information about the Buffalo Treaty in our show notes. And if you're like me and are dying to know more about the guy saved from amputation by the miraculous healing properties of bison heart, I'll also link out to the episode of Nicole's show that she was referring to.
And it's tricky and it's sensitive. People feel strongly, but I feel strongly that we need to hear from people who don't agree with us on things too. A colleague had done all this work with a couple of the people who had started the Freedom Convoy. And because they have ties to Saskatchewan, and then some older lady called in. She said she was in her 80s and she was just like, I consider myself a progressive. And I went to Milk River to the protests and I slept in my car in -40. And she was just like so passionate about why she was there and the peacefulness that she saw there. And like, I don't have to agree with her on all the things to still like listen to her and understand what drew her as an 82-year-old to go sleep in her truck, and see what was happening at this thing. So I feel like it's a balance between wanting to be surprised by some of the people who might call in and then also wanting to be really intentional about making sure that voices of people who aren't listening get heard by more people.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like the everyday tension is between wanting to just have like a really good thing for people to listen to and then also wanting to have it that people feel like they can be part of a conversation as well.
One thing I love about you and you in the world and how you see the world is the curiosity you bring to everything. You touched on this, I think, when you were talking about your photography at the beginning and how the ability to see beauty in everything around you. And I think I see that you see that beauty in people all around you as well. And even the way that you are talking about, people that you may not agree with, but being able to listen and invite them in. And that kind of inclusion and curiosity, I think, go hand in hand. I think it's a marvelous gift. I think that as a quality and a journalist, I think it's amazing. And I think as a quality and a parent, modeling that, that curiosity about the world, the people around you, the willingness to invite them in, even if they're different, even if you don't agree. For me, that is your particular brand of magic, one of your magic ingredients that I love so much about you. So I'd love to hear about that and in your work, but also, how you feel like that, does that impact your kids? Like, do you see that? Do you see you modeling that to your kids? Do you see them impacted that? Where did you learn that? Was that modeled to you?
Thanks, Nikko. That's kind. I feel like I'm always seeking out those people. Like my husband is like that too. And that's we met very young. Like we met the day after I turned 18 in a residence. And I grew up in a small town. Like I grew up in a village where there was like one Chinese family and that was the diversity, that existed. And then moved to Estevan, like a booming metropolis of 10,000 in a oil and gas town in grade 11. But it still felt like my world was opening a little bit more because all of a sudden there's like people who played in bands and there's 2 7-Elevens. It's a big place. And then moving into residence, where I met my husband, it was like so exciting because there's people from all over the world who all of a sudden just like live with you. So we had a cafeteria, and I think that was like the best thing because my now husband was just my friend at the time, but we would just every day like sit down at a new table with people from another place and just like learn about them. And I still feel like that we're very much like that. If we see somebody in a room who's by themselves, both of us will have independently over the course like gone and talked to that person. Like, we're very annoying to an Uber driver. It's like, we're a lot. We're like, oh, fresh meat. But I honestly feel like everybody who's like driving the cab and Uber, like, there's just like, you have like this little moment, this little interaction with people where, and maybe cab, you feel like a little bit more entitled to ask questions or something, but there's like this like little window into someone's life. You know that you're going to have like 10 or 15 minutes and you get to like learn a little bit about someone's life. Like, it's such a gift to get to learn about people. I've met so many people on my walk to work that I've like developed relationships with, or like ended up lending winter boots to, or like when you're open to conversation and open to learning about people, like, it happens. And I think that those like micro interactions that you have with people, it's good for people. And I live on a street where there's 2 high schools. So there's like a lot of high school kids. And then over the years, like, there's been like some kids where you just see them every day. And so you develop like, we just start like high-fiving. Like, we don't talk or anything, but they'll just be like a high five. And then, I don't know, maybe they're like, that creep. But I leave like for like the next 5 steps feeling like a little energy boost, because you had this like little micro connection with somebody. And I feel like the whole world is just an opportunity for these like little micro connections with people. And maybe that's like an extrovert thing, right? Because then that gives me energy, and other people, that might just be like sucking the energy out of them, and they're like, okay, that was a lot of micro connection. That was a little bit too much micro connection for my liking. But for me, that's what energizes me when I'm feeling the weight of everything and feeling like buried in the drudgery of the schedules and the laundry and all the like the stuff that has to happen when you have 4 kids. It's like leaving the house and having like these little interactions and reminding yourself of things is like what makes me feel good.
I love the image of you walking down
all the
street,
time,
like high-fiving
all the
teenagers.
time. Sometimes you will be left hanging, but like for the most part, or like on a bicycle. I really like on a bike when someone's going by and you stick your hand out and high five when they're biking past you too. It involves like an extra level of physical literacy, perhaps. And you're like, yeah, that was great.
Okay, so I have to ask, like, I think you just self-identified as an extrovert. Your husband is also an extrovert. Dying to know, are your kids extroverts? Like, are they just embracing this like way of being in the world? Are they horrified? Are they like, Mom, you're so much? Like what is, I need to know.
Our 13-year-old, I would say, is not an extrovert. He really loves like performing, but also really loves his alone time and like really requires that. He doesn't seem to care if he meets up with friends outside of school. The next one is an extrovert, which has been hard for him because like he loves hanging out with his buddies, but there's just like a lot of like family around and stuff going on, and so he hasn't been able to do that. And I have another extrovert who's 8 who would spend like every minute with friends if she could. And then also very extroverted 3-year-old who is obsessed with her friends that are like 9 years older than her. That's who she wants to hang out with. Are they embarrassed by me? I'm sure. And also, like, I don't care. They know that we're both going to have conversations with strangers. Like, that's just like part of who we are. And sometimes like my husband makes me feel like an introvert, like in relation, because sometimes I just want some like quiet time. I can't even imagine him being like on a flight or something and not knowing something about the person who sat beside him at the end of the flight. Like, I just can't imagine that. But it was funny. I wanted to tell you that I was talking to my coworker about your podcast and just about creativity and parenting. And I was just like, I don't know, like your children are your work. Like they are your big thing that you're doing. And he was like, yeah, but he's like, with you, you're like jazz right now. You're just like reacting to things. And I'm like, yeah, we're just jazz. We're just jazz parents right now. Because I feel like sometimes you have this like vision of like, okay, I'm like making my big orchestral thing, and there's, you include this and you include that, and here's the horn section and into parenting, and then all of a sudden it's just like someone just like, and you're just reacting. You're like, okay, no, I guess we're all just jazz musicians now, and we're all just reacting to whatever is happening next because things keep changing. And we just have to be cool with that. And like, we're just in our jazz stage of life and parenting. And I think that's okay. It's gotta like jazz. How do you feel about jazz, Nikko?
I mean, yeah, I feel good about it. I love that as an analogy for parenting. I think that's brilliant, especially at the stage where maybe we both are still, where there's just chaos, Is it free jazz? Is it what
who's
is happening?
scatting in the corner?
It's a lot. It's a lot of chaos.
Is that scat? Is that scat in that corner?
So how do you, I'm curious about how you do it. Like, you have 4 kids. To me, that sounds like a lot of kids. Like, I have 2 kids. I barely survived the day, I feel like. So curious, you mentioned your dance community and just sort of how important that is for you. How do you find the balance of being, in this responsive jazz parenting state of just constantly engaged and responsive, and also finding moments for yourself, or how do you do it?
I think that you cannot be afraid to ask for help. You can't do it on your own. We just can't. We just can't do it on our own. And there's just some things that we just can't do. Our kids just can't play elite sports because we can't have them in our community basketball and then also on a club team where they'd be playing every weekend, and because then that means that the other kid couldn't do anything. So everybody's allowed to be mediocre. And then hopefully that the trade-off of responsibility and the things that they learn is enough. It's like my mother-in-law is this giant piece of the puzzle. She's our daycare right now for the 3-year-old, and then she's at our house every day, and then she's with us for supper. It's somewhat changing a little bit with the 13-year-old because he can stay home with the kids for certain hours. But when it's a night where there's multiple things happening at the same time, that is how it works. She's able to maybe stay with the 3-year-old while one of us takes the one kid to one thing, and one of us, or maybe one of us has a meeting or something too for other things that we're involved in. I think that parenting in community is a lot easier than parenting on your own. When we go camping or to a camping music festival or something like that now, or a big group camping trip, it's we do a lot of those kinds of things. It's so much easier and fun sometimes to have a big group camping trip, and then the kids just form a feral pack of children that take care of each other, and you can just have an adult conversation. It's beautiful to me to see my 3-year-old just get scooped up by a bunch of 8 and 9 and 12-year-olds, and they're off in a wagon somewhere, and I just know that they're safe and they're okay, even if I'm not checking on them constantly, or I know that somebody will come back and get me if something happens. Or so I feel there's a little bit of just letting go and knowing that the parenting isn't all on you. All these people that you've invited into your children's life are all part of their experience growing up. I don't feel all the pressure is on me because there's all these other people who they also have connections with that they can turn to. And I think that anytime, the same as marriage, when people get married and they just make it about the 2 people, I'm that's not what marriage is. I mean, I don't know, maybe they know something I don't know, but I just feel marriage is it's you're bringing in another family, the good and the bad, all the stuff that comes with that. And family has your back, and that's not the case for everybody. But again, that might be blood family, and then people create other family. But family in the sense of the people who have your back, the people who help you get through those really hard parts, the people who help make life work, the people who you feel safe to fall asleep on their couch. Like, family is so important. And I feel like when you get married, it's about like building this family together. Like, who are the people who are going to support you when things are rough, or when things go with your kids that you need extra support at some time? And lots of people are not born into a family with supportive people or people who are able to give that, but they can find that family and create that family. So much of our parenting and our life is parenting in community. And I feel that same obligation. Like, if I see a kid and they're acting out, like, I wouldn't think twice about like having a conversation with the kid about what's going on.
Yeah.
And I would hope that my friends would feel comfortable to like ask my kid, like, what's going on with you right now if you're acting out or doing something that's like not cool.
Yeah, that community. Yeah. Parenting in community.
Yeah, it's the accountability. It's like the accountability too, and the joy of just having like knowing that a lot of people care about you, and that beautiful thing of having people who have seen you since you were a baby, you know, and seen you go through all the changes and know all the versions of you.
Yeah,
that's cool.
That is cool. When we talked before, you described yourself as a lazy parent. And that you had this sense of trust that you weren't the only person that your kids had. You used the term lazy, but I'm wondering about, is it more about having that community that has your back, that can hold your children, help you hold your children, and that you have trust in that?
I mean, I have trust in that. And also they're just like, at some point, I feel like there's just like some handing things over to the universe, like that you cannot control everything, but you can make yourself sick worrying about like every little thing, like developmental milestones and all of the things, you know. We don't actually have all the answers, and it's okay just to not fix everything. Yeah, but maybe like accept your kids for who they are and know that it changes. Like, who they are at 3 isn't necessarily who they are at 13, and just keep exposing them to the things that you want them to be exposed to. Like, I feel like time in nature is very important to me, and I feel like a better parent when I'm outside in nature. And I'm happier because like you have fresh air and you're moving your body and being mindful of the things that you do well as a parent, or where you excel, and then trying to create those circumstances can be helpful. If you know that things always are better, even though it's so hard to get out the door sometimes, like so hard, like hours sometimes of like just to get packed up and then everybody dressed and everything to like get out in winter. But once you're outside, unless it's really cold and people are crying because it's really cold, it's like often better. I don't even remember what your question was, Nikko, but the answer is go outside.
The answer to everything always is go outside. Especially related to parenting. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. Tell me about, I'm curious how you relate to the idea of perfectionism.
Yeah, I do not identify as a perfectionist at all. And that's maybe very freeing. It helps me make very competent children because I don't feel like I know the right way. Like, I'm the only one who knows how to make eggs or make whatever, you know, like I'm thinking about my 8-year-old right now, and she's insanely competent. I think part of it is because I just like allow her to try things, you know. She's allowed in the kitchen. She's allowed to like make things, and I'm not telling her like you're doing it wrong, and we'll learn something together. Like, are we great at making pie? No. Do we still try to make a pie every year? Because it's like part of the ritual of like, it's really cool to make your own pie after picking berries. Yes. You know, does it look like perfection? No. Does it still contain butter? Yes. Well, it still tastes good. Likely, you know. The fun is like the making of it. So now I have this 8-year-old who will go downstairs on a weekend morning, and she has a cafe that she's created, and like I taught her how to make coffee with the French press, and she'll like, you can choose off the menu of like eggs, what kind of whatever, and that's cool. I trust her, and like I trust another kid with like knives and whittling, and like they're allowed to have knives. They're allowed to like learn how to properly use knives and do things. Mm-hmm. So I think me not being a perfectionist has enabled other people to know that it's okay to like do something not perfectly. And I hope that is the secret to competent children. But again, for kids, and they're all different.
It also goes back to that idea of letting them be who they are, accepting who they are, not trying to fix anyone, get to that milestone. I don't know.
The tricky part of parenting in our day and age is that you have so many people who are selling something. Everybody's selling something. Like anybody who's a content creator is selling something. You're just so exposed to people selling like an idea or a dream or how things should be. Or like my husband's social media is so much different than mine. But because I'm a woman, I get all of these parenting reels sent to me constantly of people like making everything magical. Just like everybody has advice about how to like raise your kids. And they're all experts because they all made a reel about it. And I'm like very aware that like I am what's being sold to advertisers. And it's an interesting time because never before. And again, I feel like I do share a lot about my life online, like photos or whatever. I generally try to share things that don't cost money, but I am like mindful of the effect even that in your own small circle of people that it can have when you're comparing kids' milestones to other kids' milestones or what they're doing or how they're doing in sports or academically or those things. That gets tricky not to. In another time, you just wouldn't have known necessarily all that. So I think that is a tricky part of parenting in our age of like connectivity. But then also when you have a question about and you just need to be validated and just feel like, no, actually you're not alone. Like other people feel that way. Other people have dealt with that. I think that's when this media, the technology that we have comes in really handy to help people navigate that. So don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm now in my 40s. And I'm deep in it with the kids and it's like a very much a time of also supporting all of their interests and passions while maintaining like that sense of identity and something that you do for yourself too. In my case, it's like the weekly dance class, but it's like, okay, to remind ourselves about that there are seasons too. And I love hearing about women who are older who are killing it creatively. They're pursuing their art passions and they're moving their bodies in ways that they didn't know that they could move their bodies. And they're getting strong. And I just feel like when you're 20 and you're thinking about what the next 20 years of your life look like, you have like these big goals of like what you're supposed to have achieved and what you're supposed to have done and how the world is supposed to be a better place because you made it a better place. And I just want the women in their 40s who are in the thick of like creating this next generation of kids who are also hopefully going to make the world a nicer place through how they move in it, to give like us a little bit of grace and permission, like that there's so much time still to do those creative endeavors. Like I love the photographer who started when she was like 82 or, from Saskatoon. I love hearing those stories because I like having a roadmap and like, you don't know when you're going to peak your creativity and your big contribution is going to peak. So I like being able to like give yourself a little bit of permission to just like be enjoying the time right now. And you don't have to feel like you single-handedly changed the world, but you're making like these little changes day to day interactions and these micro interactions that you're having with people in the day to day. And that if that's like all you can do right now, that's enough.
Yeah. Thank you for that. There's something you said when we talked before, and I feel like this relates to what you were just saying. And I think it was in relation to your work as a journalist, but maybe just you in the world, but figuring out how do we figure out what makes you feel like you're making the lives of other people better? It's just that those can be really small things like that, what you were talking about, these micro interactions or these.
Yeah. And like last year, I lost a friend to suicide. And his service or celebration of life or whatever it was called was like really beautiful. And there's all these people sharing these stories of how he touched their lives in ways that he just would never know, you know? And I hate that. Like, it makes me so sad that he couldn't see himself the way that everybody else saw him. That he couldn't love himself the way that everybody loved him. But it's just like a reminder to me to remind the people in your life, like the people that do make your life better on a daily basis. And they might not ever know that, to tell them about that too. Mm-hmm. Even like if someone has planted some beautiful flowers and they cheer you up when you walk by their house, like letting them know that those flowers like is something and you'll feel good about it and they'll feel good. You just don't know the impact that you have on other people, and sometimes until it is too late. So I know it's hard because I think we're all conditioned, especially like journalists or an activist. You want to like lead the revolution and you want to like be there on the front lines of the revolution and see systemic change happen. But all those little things, whether, like it's helping a nation get Bison back, like everybody has that power to leave the world like a little bit better in whatever they do. Mm-hmm. We did a show about talking, about communicating in an age of like quite polarized times. And who we booked is like a barber, because he every day navigates these conversations with people who come and sit down. And it's like, what can we learn about how to have these conversations with somebody who knows what it's like to talk to people he doesn't necessarily agree with? Mm-hmm. What is the wisdom that we can learn from people? And I've done this one series called Employee of the Week. It started with the guy who he did the scanning of the groceries at the local independent grocery store near us. Like people would go out of their way to go through his till because he was just such a, like he just like made people feel special. Or like it was the guy that cleaned the floors at the general hospital. And it would go out of his way to like stop and like give people directions when they were lost. Or it made them happy when they had an interaction with him. That's important. And those stories need to be told too, just as much as the revolutionaries, because everybody has a role. And I think that we can keep aspiring to like do more and be more. And I think that's healthy. And also, what can I do today in a small way that can like make someone's life like a little bit better? You see someone that's very cold, can you just like give them a ride? Those things are easy enough to do. Strike up a conversation with somebody when you're waiting for the bus. Give them like a little pep talk. Those things don't cost anything, and you don't need a degree or a job at a fancy place to do that. You doing like a podcast like this, helping people who might feel like they weren't at 41 where they thought they were going to be at 41, maybe career-wise or whatever, because they got sidetracked by like bringing humans into the world and doing other things or taking care of themselves through health concerns or, whatever sidetracks people's dreams, because they're getting wisdom. They're getting that hard-fought wisdom. So when they write their book at 80, they have a whole lifetime of wisdom to draw from and to share with people.
Thank you for that. And want you to know how you are in the world brings so much light and goodness and help. Thank you for being you. I see you in the world, and I love that I get to be in your life.
Now let's go outside.
Yes, good caller. Our kids have been, I will mention, this is winter holidays, Sunday afternoon. Our kids are doing God knows what. They've been quiet for almost 2 hours, like bless them, and our partners. And yes, let's go outside.
Yes.
Thanks, Nichole.
Hello, anybody out there. Hello. Ooh, yeah, I know they never get an answer. Hello. Ooh.
Thanks again to Nichole Huck for joining me on Parenting Creative and sharing her particular brand of magic. And thanks to all of you for listening. If you want to hear more conversations about the alchemy of parenting and creative life, please help the podcast grow by visiting parentingcreative.com to sign up for our email newsletter. And if you're able, by becoming a founding member of Parenting Creative. You can find out more information about that on our website or in the show notes. I also want to give credit to my partner in parenting and podcasting, Jeremy Sauer, for all his work to make Parenting Creative sound great, and to Natural Sympathies for the use of her song Hello as the Parenting Creative theme song. The song asks, is anyone out there? And I hope that you are. Parenting Creative is recorded and produced on the traditional and unceded territory of the Sinixt in BC's Slocan Valley. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon.